and continuing with masculinity and men. I mean, we traditionally read throughout this book that basically men became men by acquiring cattle, protecting cattle through initiation, through marrying and having heirs, hopefully sons. We know that because of the wars and even current political developments today, and also financial crises, that having access to cattle was not a guarantee. Perhaps in many places it's still not a guarantee, which then also makes marrying a tricky thing. So, you know, what instead can men hinge their masculinity on when these traditional ways of being a man are not so possible?
Okay.
And we can start with maybe the population in South Sudan,
Yeah.
and then branch off from there.
So we talked a little bit about somehow the war created tremendous pressures on the women and the mothers, but we also have to realize that the tremendous pressures it placed on men. Because if you think about it, one of the two most exclusive domains, shall we say, of men's status and authority and power as men were through cattle exchange, cattle sacrifice, but also one of their main duties, if not the most important, was to claim they are the protectors of women and children. They are the protectors of homestead and herd. And this is important because when the war starts and they don't have, I mean, the guns that they were facing, the aircraft, the helicopter gunships, later on in the war, but even early, they simply did not have the equipment, military equipment, to defend themselves against it. There was a tremendous inequality. I remember Nuer talking to me about the first Civil War, and they took the attitude, that the only reason that the northern, what they call Arabs, won the war, Delamne or Karegni, won the war is just because their guns were bigger, and they get those from the white people. They did not see their inability to get independence during that war as somehow any disreflection on their power and strength and courage. It was just the guns were bigger. If we had those guns, we would have routed them a long time ago. So now this comes back to the Second Civil War. The guns are even bigger. We have bombers, and what is a man to feel to do? If you can't protect your women and children, that too is a crisis for you too. Yes, you can join the military and you hope the military, but then the splits come, and the military is not necessarily the men in the military are told that they have the right. There have been arguments like keeping up the reproductive front and women should they had a lot of derogation, I would say, or women, but it's still a crisis for men too. So how do you heal this? Yes, so in the South, people who stayed in the area, it's such a different thing depending on how much displacement there was. Could you, or how far they had to go? Could they come back to their houses? Did they have any cattle left? And these are all variables. But so people who had to flee, let's say, to Khartoum, right? I mean, that was a big way for the Western Nuer during that war. I mean, of course, they have no cattle in Khartoum, and they're struggling, and the shanty villages are being mowed down by bulldozers. I mean, I researched that area. I was there. I talked to them. I watched this process. So they're suddenly thrown into a world that's all about money. Maybe get a goat, and if you had a marriage or something, but they continue to scarify. They continue to, marry, but they married. What they did is they sort of doubled up, and they said, okay, we have some relations with people down in cattle in the south. We have some plains. We can move, if we know the two families, we can move cattle there. But also, you pay some money here now for to marry this woman, but when the world becomes good again, you give us cows, real cows, or something like that. So this was one way they deal with it. But you had people in the south which have no access to money whatsoever, right? So they did something. You had people that went to Ethiopia, all different people that, so you had scattered. Some people had access to money, some people, there were relations, assumptions of people might retain cattle who are outside the country even, with rights in their families heard in the days. But so that was there. The initiation continued to take place, particularly on the eastern Nuer, both in the area and outside the area. The western Nuer were, less so, but they had given up scarification, or didn't see it as such a critical element of manhood, at least a generation earlier than the Nuer in the east. I could go into maybe some of the reasons for that, but so I've almost lost my train of thought now. So we're just talking about what sources of masculinity can men develop. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to be up to men and women, and it's not my place to make, I'm just saying from my humble perspective as an outsider, people are finding new ways. Community leadership is one, leadership in the church is another, but I think it's possible to create leadership where men, this is an ideal world suggesting here, that men in supporting their wives and children in ways that are positive for them too, in a direct way that might take away a little of their authority, or at least release a little of their authority, might be good in the long run. It might reduce divorces, it might reduce other kinds of situations, but men can create new ways of doing that. And right now we also have the situation that a lot of the people who served in the military and had the guns, and they didn't get an education, right? So the whole society to support not only those men, but also women who had no opportunities, the youth, as a collective element to create at least literacy, which gives people a sense of power and less vulnerability towards that whole phenomenon. People in the past, youth took pride in their abilities to dance, in their abilities to create song, and their abilities of speaking with a cool tongue. These were all, a generosity was huge in creating leadership possibilities. And of course the generosity of men depended on women to make the food, etc. So generosity goes a long way, a collective spokesperson, and also trying to create relations of harmony with the neighbors in a way that can help support the security of the local communities in ways that are not built entirely around guns. Those might be some suggestions.
Thank you so much. So, of course, this work has to be collective. It has to be on the part of all of us. Speaking for us in the diaspora here in America, it's masculinity crisis and issues between genders is not just a Nuer issue. It's right now a global issue. It really is. And there are ways of repairing this, and I think we need to have this sort of dialogue, this sort of informed dialogue, because all of us in America are coming out of this context of the 80s Civil War, of the 90s Civil War, where there was so much rupture, there was so much death, harm, depression, sadness, trauma that came, and also instability within the home. So now we're carrying that here in the United States and trying to be Americans, be Nuer Americans. And it's not easy, but we've had being Nuer it's a dynamic thing, and there's a future that we can dream of together and that we can work towards. But it's collective. It's through again being in dialogue with elders, so that we can be knowledgeable about our past, and so that we can facilitate and work towards this future that is so possible for us.
Yeah, and the bit about learning more about your past, I talk about it. Discover your past, empower your future. Because no one can really know where they're going if they don't have a clear idea of where they came from. And what I sense, but you would know better than me, that sometimes the communication in the diaspora is difficult between the generations. Not only are the youth experiencing different things in their school or whatever, their kind of age group experiences, than the older people who are maybe, if it's parents, you know, they might be having 3 jobs and there might be stress. I mean, they have no odd hours. It's all very understandable that, you know, this takes place. And you know, obviously crises, mental health crises, substance abuse crises is one ramification of this. But I think that if the youth, you know, in your communities right now, I'm talking girls, boys, men, women, young youth, if you reach out to some of the elders in your community and, you know, just ask them, you know, what was dating like when you were, you know, especially the ones who grew up maybe before the war and a second civil war, and how did you manage marriage back then? Or, you know, what were some of the things that, you know, your heroes at the time? I think some of those older people would be very forthcoming and maybe even be honored. They may not feel that they can reach out to the youth, they don't want to impose their ideas. And there is this kind of, especially the men, not so much for women, in newer culture, kind of like the men stick with the men, and the, you know, different age grades as the old, they didn't even always eat together, cross age grades. Women, more flexibility. Women could all eat together, the grandmothers and the mothers and the children and all of that. But I think that if you reached out to them, interview them, tape it, you know, and then let's create something. I also see wonderful opportunities to express the newer youth to create art, songs, music, which they're doing to some degree, about their own experiences. I would love to see short videos, that talk about their refugee experience, because in order to make something like that, to create the art, to create something that you can share with others in whatever medium it is, you know, it could be painting or poetry, but to do that, everyone has to step back just a little bit and look at their life from a little bit higher angle. And that gives you room to think freshly. What you want, what are your aspirations for your society, for yourself? And as we open up those discussions, perhaps people will discover, hey, that we share some ideas about how we might move ahead. So I would encourage people to do that. The youth are the ones that are going to carry forward the culture. And I have tremendous faith in the creative powers. And so I just want to encourage you.
Yes.
I'd love to see that.
And very much connected to this is about how women in the diaspora can create solidarity for women here in the United States. And then also I really believe we should be working here to create solidarity and to pool resources for women still in Nuer land too, because we're in the United States, we're in a much more stable situation than those of us in Nuer land, and I believe it's our duty to document, write down, have these conversations with elders, record these stories, because it's actually not it's not simple, easy, or inevitable that a language or a culture will continue. There's a lot of work that gets put into it, especially when there's so much happening geopolitically and there's so much destabilization. So
there are women's associations. I was
Yes.
South Sudan Association concerned Nuer women, and I would encourage that maybe that could extend beyond both inside Nuer, but also to other South Sudanese is incredibly important. Because let's face it, I think women in general, not always, can be a force to transcend some of the divisions in ways that men might find it more difficult. I don't know. Not always, but
yeah.
it's a hope.
Yes, and motherhood here in this community is motherhood in the next community. It's in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And I'll end with this question about, again, focus on the diaspora. So what's, we're in the diaspora, we have our scholars here, we have a lot of academic resources and other resources here. So, I mean, how should we mobilize these resources in order to enrich our community? We'll start with our community here.
Okay. Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
But first I want to say there are people that are doing wonderful things. And what I've found is sometimes they're in isolation. They don't necessarily know, what's going on in Western Nuer inside the country or Eastern Nuer, but also between Australia and people here. But first of all, I say I'm really encouraged that many people have taken on that role. One of the things I'm most pleased about is this little book called Nuer Psychological Health by Dr. John Quick. Now, John Quick, he lives out in San Diego. I've met him. He's a PhD, and he's a family therapist and also marriage counselor. And he has had a deep training in sort of Western medical notions of mental health states and different kinds of illnesses. And so he has written the first, what I would call scientific or academic but also self-help book in the Nuer language. And I think it's brilliant because he had to go through all the standard diagnoses, and his goal was to write something in Nuer so people could access it and show them the kind of main types of mental crises that people can have, whether it's schizophrenia or anxiety or depression or whatever. And he had to create new terms for that, or in Nuer, and explain what you can do and how you can help them, and how these people themselves, if they read this book and you recognize, well, maybe I'm depressed, it offers suggestions on how you might go about it. We have other people. I was thinking Ruth Maluit, Thomas Maluit, Unyakal, who I think have helped write something for refugees coming into Canada, and writing these kinds of works, which just show health, writing, Lat Shang Sheng, Lat Luak Nath, Sheng Canada, what it's like. All of these things, these are huge resources. We have since independence and just before, we have had Nuer scholars and just writing. Here's a dictionary, a Thok Nath English dictionary that was for the Eastern Jikane Nuer dialect. That's important, that dialect. But he's Lual Shrine Shul. He has passed, I believe, but I'm not sure. I'm sure he has actually. But he has done a really interesting job, at least getting together a lot of words and writing them in the style of the Eastern Nuer. We have another man who wrote a Nuer English dictionary, again Far Eastern, using a different alphabet, sort of the Ethiopian style alphabet, if you want to look at it that way, a later one. And these are good starts. To me, it's a little sad they did not have access to the book that I published, republished Keegan's English Nuer Dictionary with my company, South Sudan Cultural Production, which is much larger. But they did it, and we have people who are sending me documents saying, "Oh, I've written this history of Nuer of the Eastern Jukane, or this is something about, something else. Can you take a look at it?" And I try. I mean, it's a lot of effort, but I'm just delighted. And we have people that are making, Nuer stories, Nuer histories online, and people are making little videos and comedies, and all of that is wonderful. But we have room for so much more, and particularly on the historical angle between generations. Because your grandparents, to the extent that they're nearby you, are not going to live forever, and they have such a rich element of history. And I think if you reach out, you'll find a very welcome willingness to share it with you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. This has been such a lovely conversation.
Oh.
I feel so fulfilled. Like this has been beautiful.
For me too. I know that I'm an outsider, but I'm deeply committed and concerned, and I do know a lot of the history, and I'm working very hard right now not only to create more resources so that the language can continue with lots of help. I mean, I'm not doing this alone. I am coordinating with people in Juba and Gambel and Ulfangak. So it's not me, but I can help bring them together. But more importantly, I in my own house have so many resources that I created over the decades that I want to be sure that I can somehow put out there. It's like raw history, raw history. Maybe it's me interviewing some now late but famous Nuer chief or prophet, or maybe it's just them giving a talk to one of their friends or in a public situation, or maybe it's women storytellers who, you know, have fabulous children's stories which I'm transcribing into Nuer to make more storybooks. And I have photographs and I have maps. And it's a big project for me. And if you really want to help me, you really do, the people in diaspora could help me by going to my website, you know, at neurdilemmas.com, www.neurdilemmas.com. And there is a whole bunch of books you can buy. And if you buy the dictionary, the grammar, which aren't that expensive, or the new edition of my own book, where I've updated it with a chapter written in the Nuer language, which was not there before, and this Nuer folktales, when you do that, then money flows to me, which allows me to then bring out the next book. I've invested considerable personal money, but it's getting to the point that, you know, I need some resource, people to buy the books, and so that I can actually give some of them for free in South Sudan, where people have no money for such things, that people haven't paid for whatever, even the civil servants, you know, for over 14 months. So I need paper. We need paper. But that's what you can do for me. When you buy my book on Amazon, even if it's an old used copy, some of them are pirated, I see nothing. So that I would say, or if you want to contribute, I guess you can. I haven't figured that out. I've never asked for money. But this is what would help me continue. Thank you so much for whatever support you've given to the past. But if you buy books, it will really help me keep this project going. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have tremendous confidence in the younger and the older generation. Yours is an amazing language and a dynamic cultural history. I'm honored to be part of the people that recorded for you. Thank you.